All right, welcome to another edition of The Locker Room on YouTube. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610, 10 to 2 Central, the home of the Texans. I want to talk about the connections of CJ Stroud. Usually when a quarterback gets selected, he's connected to his draft class. And it's just even any athlete, when any athlete gets drafted, they're connected to their draft class. And more times than not, they're connected to guys that went after them and guys that went before them. They're still talking about Michael Jordan and Sam Bowie. There's talk about the 1983 class with John Elway, Dan Marino, Jim Kelly. Draft classes are always connected. You look at the famous Slam magazine with Kobe's class. And when it comes to CJ Stroud, the connections are as intense as I can remember. And maybe it's because I'm close to the situation, but when you localize it and you connect CJ Stroud to the other quarterbacks in his class, it's a strong connection. And based on some of the dialogue that's being thrown out there now, it seems like the connection could get even stronger when it comes to what the Texans did and what they were willing to do in order to trade up for him. Let's start with connection number one, and this is the obvious one. Bryce Young. Bryce Young was a guy who many felt the Texans were in position to get. They ended up pissing away that opportunity last year, whether you blame it on the inability to trade Brandon Cooks, whether you blame it on the inability to sit Brandon Cooks, whatever you blame it on, the Texans were believed to have gotten Bryce Young, not just after that, but for a short time in the offseason when it seemed like Stroud was going to go number one. So that connection's obvious. You're gonna see Bryce Young and CJ Stroud connected for their entire careers. And it's been kind of fun. I'm actually like the fire that Texans fans currently have, because there's a lot of short jokes now with Bryce Young, now that you know that CJ's your guy, but those guys are going to be connected forever. And they know that, and they seem to get along. So that's the obvious connection there. Connection number two is Anthony Richardson, who was selected 2 picks after CJ Stroud. This is a really strong connection too, and it might be a little bit more relevant because you had a quarterback go 2 spots after CJ, and he goes to a team in the division with another first-year head coach who, by the way, the Texans had interest in. So these connections run even deeper. You have DeMeco Ryans, the first-year head coach, with his quarterback CJ Stroud, against Shane Steichen, the first-year head coach, with Anthony Richardson. So that's a strong connection in itself as well. You then have Will Levis, connection number 3, who went to the old Oilers, the Tennessee Titans. So you have another quarterback in the division. You have 2 quarterbacks in the division, one quarterback that went right before CJ Stroud, and he happened to go with the pick that the Texans had before they made the trade for CJ Stroud. So he goes 33, which the Texans had. He goes in the division. He's a guy you passed on for CJ. So those connections are strong as well. So you have 3 quarterbacks in the division. CJ's connected to 2 of them. He went ahead of both of them. And the Texans actually had the draft pick where Will Levis went. And if Will Levis goes on somehow to have an awesome career, that'll be the trivia question. Who originally had the draft pick to take Will Levis? That connection is really strong. There's another connection coming up that I think is interesting, and I think we need to dive into this because it could potentially be the most significant connection of all, but I do think that it needs to be discussed in a different way in which it's being discussed online among national media types and maybe people who aren't as close to the Texans situation, and that's the potential connection with a quarterback in 2024. We've had a lot of people, including myself, say that maybe it would have been in the best interest of the Texans to trade the pick and wait till 2024 to draft a quarterback. When the Las Vegas odds dropped yesterday, win-loss totals, and the Texans were tied for the fewest expected wins, a lot of people started throwing out hypotheticals about if the Texans have the number 2 pick, and let's say they could have had Drake May or something like that, how are you going to look at this trade that they made to go up and get Will Anderson and CJ Stroud? Mina Kimes, one of the best analysts in the game, said this on Twitter on one hand, if Will Anderson is incredible, no one will care in 3 years. But let's say Texans struggle in a year. How good will Anderson have to be worth picks 12 and 3? That's looking at the trade the wrong way. The way in which this trade is going to be measured is by how CJ Stroud plays. This was all about the quarterback. I would be willing to bet that if the Texans were just going to pick at 2 and 12, that Will Anderson would have potentially been the pick. The reason that they decided to take CJ first was to eliminate the trade market at 3 and get Will Anderson, the other guy they were debating at taking at 2, and get both of these guys in a package deal. So CJ Stroud being compared to the quarterbacks that we just mentioned and the next quarterbacks in the class is the real connection. It's not going to be Will Anderson. They are a package deal, but this package deal, and Mina mentioned this as well on NFL Live, this package deal, and she followed it up with a tweet as well. This package deal, it's all about CJ Stroud. I do also want to mention that on top of the narrative around the trade and everyone looking at Will Anderson, there is something else that I think is a lesson that we probably should have learned last year and that we've learned many times, and that's assuming where a draft pick is going to be. A lot of people assumed that the Texans, when they traded a draft pick to go up and get Deshaun Watson, that was going to be a pick in the 20s. Deshaun Watson ends up getting hurt, and the Cleveland Browns have a top 4 pick. Last season, the Rams were coming off a Super Bowl. You figured that, the draft pick that Seattle, that the Rams had traded to the Lions wouldn't be a high pick. It was a high pick. You had the Broncos. They made the trade with Seattle, and Seattle's pick was higher than we'd expected. So assuming that a pick is going to be where you think it is, it's cool, I guess, but it's also kind of delusional when it comes to what can happen in the NFL. With that said, the Texans, in order to avoid an even more intense connection with CJ Stroud, avoiding having a top 2 pick would be very beneficial. There's already going to be pressure on CJ Stroud. There's already going to be pressure on the organization. If you decide not to wait for a quarterback and then you end up winning a few games and having the number 2 pick anyways, and you might have a chance to get another quarterback without giving up all that draft equity, and you could have used extra picks to improve your roster, that's where the danger is. And that's why the Texans are going to have to win more games and not fall in that situation to where they put CJ Stroud in a tough spot. Because we've already talked about 3 potential connections, or 3 real connections with CJ Stroud, with Bryce Young, Levis, and Richardson. We don't want to have to connect him to Drake May. That would be kind of a disaster. The good news is a lot of times people assume these things and it doesn't work out. And also, the Texans have improved their roster. So we'll see what happens. But I cannot remember a quarterback coming into the league like CJ Stroud with this many connections in the division in front of him. And potentially, when you talk about the plan that the Texans decided not to take on, which was Kyle Shanahan's plan in 2017, wait a year for the quarterback. The Texans decided not to do that. They went and got their guy, CJ Stroud. Now, CJ Stroud, he's got some pressure on him, but it kind of comes with the territory. I think he knows that. They got to win more games than people expect. You fall outside the top 10, no one's even gonna dot an I when it comes to this. But if you do fall in that range that Las Vegas is predicting you and a lot of people are predicting you to have, then the connections get even more intense. It's going to be fun to see what CJ does. It's going to be fun to see how this plays out. Good news is it's going to happen on the field. And I also don't anticipate the Texans winning less than 5.5 games. I think they're going to be a better squad than many think. It's really all going to depend on Bobby Slowick. So Bobby Slowick controls this fate. And also, the Texans aren't going to be trying to lose because they don't have their own draft pick. So they're going to be trying to win every single game, which I know is good news for a lot of people because having to root for the Colts last year kind of sucked. Those are the CJ Stroud connections. Did I miss any? Put it in the comments. Subscribe, like, listen to me 10 to 2 Central on Sports Radio 610, right around the locker room. daily Texans digital content throughout the season, not just during the draft. I'm going to keep it coming for you guys. And I anticipate some real special guests and some more good content for you guys that creates discussion and just enjoys the great times that are here right now with all the excitement when it comes to the Texans, whether they win or lose. No matter what happens, just remember, when it comes to this Texans game, we are all in this together. Appreciate you for coming through the locker room.
Yeah, it's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey, locker room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do.